go ahead and kick it off. All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our ACT Valley of the Sun chapter webinar series. I'm Chris Barker, Vice President for our ACT board here in Arizona, and we're thrilled to have everybody joining. This is our first webinar for our fall schedule, and we'll be having another webinar later this month on the 22nd of October, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail at the end of our session. But today we are very fortunate to have a fantastic guest with us who's joining from the state of Arizona. And we're going to be talking about kind of where we are on our path toward electrification in transportation in the Southwest, covering Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. Also, pleased to welcome our ACT colleagues from the Rocky Mountain chapter who are joining our webinar today as well. Before I introduce our guest speaker, just a housekeeping item. We are going to have some interactive polling as part of this discussion today. So if you have your phone handy, there'll be some points throughout the conversation where the questions will be posed and we'll use your phone as the polling mechanism. So if you can have that handy, that would be great. And with that said, it is my pleasure to introduce Tom Sahhar, who is the Energy Program Manager for the Arizona Department of Administration for the state of Arizona. And Tom, it's great to have you this morning. Welcome.
Hi, thank you, Chris. Thank you for the warm welcome. Appreciate everybody jumping on the call today as we talk about electrification in the Southwest. As I'm looking at our list of folks that are on the call, I see some familiar names and some familiar faces. So thank you for jumping on. Can everybody hear me okay? Let's start with that.
You're coming through well on our end.
Yes. We're good? Okay,
absolutely.
Great. Hopefully we don't have any technical issues and the earbuds hold up, and we'll go from there. So once again, good morning and welcome to the call. So as we talk about electrifying transportation in the Southwest, I wanted to just let you know a little bit about myself. I am born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona, so I've watched the city and the state grow at various stages and very rapidly over the past dozen of years or so. It's been very interesting to watch and try and get to different places. So with that being said, I am the Energy Programs Manager for the state of Arizona. I've been with the state for approximately 2 years. But I have not always been in politics and done those type of things. So a little bit about my background. I grew up being an auto enthusiast. I was an auto mechanic for several years. I was a fleet service manager that covered many Western states and had up to 50 different types of mechanics on the road, working on everything from hydraulics, electric vehicles, electric lift trucks, different types of cleaning equipment. So the picture that I'm trying to paint for you here is that I come from more of the technical background as opposed to the political background. So that's a little bit about myself. As you take a look at this slide that I currently have up, this shows a lot of different types of vehicles. Something that I think is very interesting about all of these photos is it talks about, in pictures, the evolution of the automobile and some vehicles that have been extremely successful, and some vehicles such as the Edsel in the upper right-hand corner, which I still own, that was not very successful for a number of reasons. Some of these vehicles were considered to be ahead of their time, and other vehicles were considered to just be kind of duds. If you look at the Chevy in the lower left-hand corner and the Corvette and the Camaro, these are all kind of icons and classics that have kind of standed the test of time, and folks seek these out for very high dollars to try and refurbish and keep as classics and put on the road. The other vehicles that you see, we have a Chevy Bolt, a Lucid, and a Tesla on there as well. And I think as time goes on, it'll be very interesting to watch the evolution of the gas-powered engine into the electric vehicle, and which ones of these could potentially stand the test of time as classics and really just outperforming some of the others. So it's just kind of an interesting piece to kind of put up there. So a little bit about me, a little bit about my background. I currently own, in one way, shape, or form, 3 of these vehicles that are in this picture. So just kind of an interesting piece there. So I wanted to talk with you about kind of set the stage here for electrification in the Southwest, and talk with you a little bit about RevWest and what RevWest is. RevWest is a memorandum of understanding that 8 governors in the western states have signed, basically to provide a framework for creating Intermountain West EV corridor that makes it possible to drive an EV across major transportation corridors in the West. It's a collaboration between these 8 states. I am currently a member of RevWest, and there are many things that we talk about during these meetings. Kind of the biggest piece that I want you to walk away with today, and a better understanding about RevWest, is that it is a very large collaboration. And I think all of these states understand that it's very important to be able to put in collaboration of infrastructure in order for folks to be able to travel from one state through another state, both for commerce piece, for just a travel and tourism piece. I think each one of these states present different things and bring different types of folks. As you all know, in Arizona, we have a lot of tourism. And if we have folks that are driving EVs, we want to be able to make it comfortable and convenient for these folks to be able to come to Arizona. So that's a little bit about RevWest. I'll pause there if you have any questions so far.
Tom, I have a question. So related to this initiative, can you talk about kind of the progress to date of what's been happening with these states coming together, and how that's advancing electrification so far?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So recently there was a second MOU that was put out to all of the states for the governors to sign on. And thankfully, all of the governors recommitted to the most current MOU. There are a number of things that are taking place. We have regular calls that are hosted through NASEO, National Association of Energy Officials. They host these calls and compile all the data and kind of keep all of us headed in the right direction. So we have put together minimum standards. So I can talk about a number of things that are taking place, but probably the biggest one is minimum standards for charging stations along corridors. So it ensures that state A and state B and state C, as an individual is traveling through these states, you can travel through these states and have the same type of charging stations, the same type of distances, making sure that it's only X number of miles off of the highway corridor and intersections, that it has safety features in place, that has the different types of amenities that would be required to be able to stop at that location and charge. Something that I think is very important note to take away is that we are not allowed to put charging stations at rest stops in the West. So, as you look at this, the easy one is to say, hey, let's just put these charging stations at a rest stop. We're not allowed to put them at rest stops. So you have to find alternative locations to be able to put these. So I think that the big picture to paint here is that there's a collaboration between 8 states to try and put in the same type of infrastructure so that it's convenient, safe. There's a good understanding of, if I own an EV, that I can travel from state A to state X and be able to charge along.
And the rest stop piece, is there a reason for that as to other locations?
So this is the Federal Highway Administration that mandates whether or not you can put these in at rest stops. So if you go to the East Coast, if you travel along the East Coast at some of these rest stops, you'll see different types of convenience stores. You'll see different types of restaurants at rest stops, different gas stations. Basically, once you head west of the Mississippi, there was a ruling that was put in place a number of years ago to eliminate that and just to try and level the playing field for different types of businesses for these small towns. So, you think about Route 66 and some of the old ways of traveling. If you were to put these in at federal highway rest stops, that it, in some cases, could have just shut these towns down. So it's a decision that's made from a much higher level.
Got it.
That's a great question, because it's one that, on the surface you look at and you say, hey, just put them in a rest stop and we're done.
And on a related note, is there kind of suggested areas where you see these type of charging stations being placed in convenient locations? Is there best practices and recommendations that are coming out of Rev West for that going forward?
So we do have minimum standards that are being put in place in regards to the distance that you want to be able to see these within locations. Here in Arizona, some of the locations that we're looking at is if there are state-owned facilities, if we could put them in at state-owned facilities. So an example of that might be a state park that's along a highway that we could go in and put in a charging station. With that being said, there are many private companies that are looking at putting in. You may see them at a shopping center. You may see an EV charging station, side by side with a gasoline fuel distribution center, such as Maverick or Chevron or something to that effect. So you may see them at restaurants. You may see them at convenience stores. You may see them at a coffee shop. So those are some things that are being looked at to place these. I will tell you that for Arizona, and I'll speak to New Mexico just a little bit here. One of the many things that we have in common is a large amount of space between towns. So, you can travel from, Tucson to Phoenix. There's, Casa Grande in the middle. You can travel from Phoenix to Flagstaff. You've got kind of Prescott in the middle. You start going beyond those areas and trying to identify locations that are quote unquote out in the middle of nowhere. There's lots of cactuses, lots of wild burros, some wild horses, and a lot of sand. So identifying some of these locations can prove to be challenging, but I think all the states are up for the challenge.
Very good.
So I'll move to our next slide. This is just a fun little piece that I have in here. The benefits of electric vehicles versus myths. And I've just selected some, and some of you may be very familiar with electric vehicles. Some of you may not be, but I think this slide is designed to kind of just talk to an individual that maybe isn't very familiar with electric vehicles, why they would want to do it. So we'll just talk a little bit about benefits and some of the myths. So EVs are a fad. I think personally that's a myth. I think EVs are here for the long run. That's a personal opinion based on what we're seeing both in government, private sector is doing, what OEMs are doing, and the amount of investments that are taking place. They are expensive. Is that a fact or a myth? I think it depends on kind of where you're at and what you're considering buying. I think expensive is relative. So if you were to compare, the new Teslas that you can get into for approximately $40,000, compared to a new vehicle that's very similar with an internal combustion engine, I think the initial upfront price is very similar. When you look at the overall cost, so if you look at the lower overall cost of ownership, if you run the numbers for maintenance costs, fuel costs, and I have a calculator here that we'll look at in a moment. When you compare all those things, depending on the type of vehicle that you're purchasing and comparing, what we've seen is that it is a lower overall cost of ownership for an EV. As we're talking about the cost of these vehicles, no used vehicles available. I will share with you that I did a study about 6 months ago for used EVs in the area. It was maybe just a little bit more than 6 months ago. And what I was trying to do was identify a way to commute to and from my workplace and be able to utilize the HOV lane and save some time. So I began doing a study on used vehicles or electric vehicles. And I can tell you that I found 3 to 5 year old used EVs with less than 36,000 miles for $10,000 to $15,000. So it was very comparable, if not less expensive than an internal combustion engine. So a little piece on that. Zero support in my state for EVs. Early adopters really kind of reap the rewards in regards to some of the rebates that were available to lower the cost. There are still many rebates in place. And when we talk about support, we talk about, being able to take it to the dealership or a third-party vendor to, have things repaired or replaced on these vehicles. There's been a lot of education around educating mechanics and converting fleets over to electric vehicles. So there is quite a bit of support. The state of Arizona, we've purchased 2 electric vehicles. These are the first 2 full electric vehicles we've put in place. One of the things that I wanted to do was have colleagues go out and drive the vehicle. And an interesting piece that I heard was, I don't know how to drive this. So is that a myth or a fact? There's a little bit of a hurdle. Anytime you jump into a new type of vehicle, whether it's an internal combustion engine, whether it's an electric vehicle, and it's more about familiarization with the vehicle. So, when you went from an actual hard key start to a push button start, a lot of folks didn't know, how to do that, and interacting with all the, onboard features of pop-up screens and turning on the radio and all of those types of things. I can tell you the actual functions of driving the vehicle, once you're familiar with it, are extremely similar. So if you've not had an opportunity to drive an electric vehicle, I would challenge you over the next 30 days or so. Obviously, there's COVID in place and all of those types of things. But if you have the opportunity to do a ride and drive or do a test drive of an electric vehicle, I think you'll find that they are a lot of fun to drive. The acceleration on many of these vehicles is much higher and faster than an internal combustion engine. The handling is very tight. So I would challenge you to go drive one. They're fun to drive. There are health benefits to an electric vehicle. When you talk about emissions, there's lower emissions, and I think it's just a great alternative. So I'm going to click on this link here, and I'll pause before I click on this link and just see if there's any questions on any of these benefits, facts, and myths.
I had a couple of questions coming in, but one, Tom, you mentioned fleets and conversions from combustion engines to EVs. What's your view on the cost benefits, the maintenance benefits, and just general acceptance of converting fossil fuel powered vehicles to electric vehicle fleets, whether it be in government, in private sector? what are you seeing, and how do you see that migration playing out?
So Chris, what I would tell you is that change is hard, and without education to just change a fleet of mechanics that are used to working on internal combustion engines, and that's what they've been trained on for many, many years. These vehicles have less maintenance. So if you're looking at it from a holistic view of your maintenance costs, the total cost of ownership, the fueling of these vehicles, the emissions, those type of things, there are a ton of benefits that you have in place. When you are converting a fleet over, some of the pushback that I believe the fleet managers will have are from the technicians themselves. And I think it has to be very thoughtful in how you convert that fleet to make sure that your technicians are made whole. And sometimes that means that you have to do a retraining of these technicians. So, rotating tires are very similar. There's no oil changes. Yeah. But the deep engine type of work, there's not that type of work. So, if you think about not having, let's say you have 30% the amount of maintenance that you have to do on this type of vehicle, does that mean that you need to reduce your fleet mechanics and your technicians by 30%? My answer is no if you do retraining. But I think that there are, from fleet managers that I've spoken with in the past, that is a concern for them, and being able to retrain their folks on that. So a little bit of a long-winded answer, Chris, but I think that looks at the bigger picture of how you convert a fleet, and thinking more holistic as opposed to just, hey, this vehicle was overall cost of ownership was $50,000 versus $40,000. So there's a lot of pieces in play.
Absolutely. Tom, we've got a couple other questions that have come in. One is related to people purchase electric vehicles for the benefit of traveling in the HOV lanes on highways and freeways. Are there thoughts of future permitting, allowing for single occupant drivers of EVs on HOV lanes in Phoenix and other areas? Do you see permitting changes and things to further encourage adoption, even if it's a single occupant or single driver?
So as it stands today, and I may lean on my friends over at DEQ that are on the line, but my understanding is that as it stands today, if you purchase an electric vehicle, you receive a blue plate with that vehicle, which allows a single occupant driver to drive in the HOV lane. I don't know if that will be changing in the future or not. If there's an individual on the line that could speak to that maybe a little bit better than I'd be happy to toss that question to them.
Okay. We'll come back to that in just a moment. The other question that came up was related to how realistic is it for apartment dwellers to get an electric vehicle as it pertains to availability of charging stations or not? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's one that comes up fairly frequent, and it comes up in regards to how you build the future. As many of us on the call may be aware, Maricopa County has been growing leaps and bounds over the past few years, and we're one of the largest growing, fastest growing counties in the country. With that being said, you have to look at multi apartments, if you will, and that type of thing. And what do you do for these folks? And as you talk to utility companies and different builders, they have to look at the larger piece of the community and how do you put those amenities in place? So it is being thought of. It is something that is being worked on to solve those issues. So it's not being left in the rearview mirror, and it's a very good question, and it's one that's being thought through.
Are you seeing developers and people who are building future apartment complexes engaging with you and other folks at the state level or even the local level when it comes to incorporating EVs into building plans?
Yes, and I've attended some meetings at the Corporation Commission as well, and those are the types of questions that are being brought up there as well. So it's being looked at and viewed and discussed on many different levels. So I think in the future we will see it will just be a mainstay that's put in place.
Very good. One other question before we move on is what are the plans for recycling the batteries for electric vehicles? Any thoughts on that?
You know, that's a great question, and I don't personally have the answer to that. So I'm going to have to pass on that question.
Okay, no problem. I think you were going to show a calculator.
Yep, let's see if hopefully all of our technology works today and we can continue to move forward. So this is an electric drive cost calculator, and I just wanted to kind of walk you through here. So we're just going to go with an electric vehicle, and we'll compare it to, so this is an electric vehicle that it'll show what your kilowatt hours usage versus gasoline. I think this is pretty generous, 31 city, 40 highway for the gasoline vehicle. And this is based on some old, very old information. So it's based on a 2013 Nissan Leaf and a Versa. So as we go through, the normal daily use is 30 miles a day. Other trips is about 3,500 miles a year. So it's comparing apples to apples. And are you able to see this clearly?
Yes, I think so. Hopefully everybody else can as well.
Okay. See if it loads here.
It's a cool little calculator.
We have a spinning wheel, so hopefully it comes through here. Chris, we may have an issue with our connection here, so bear with me.
No problem.
We may have lost our video feed, so.
Yeah, all of a sudden you've, I can hear you, but we can't quite see you, unfortunately.
Okay.
Hopefully that pops back in just a second.
Yeah.
While we're waiting for that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you have any questions that I can answer, so I've dialed in, and then we have the computer, and it looks like the computer is trying to reconnect. But if there's any questions that I can answer, as we're trying to reestablish connection here.
I was just going to say, we've got another question. Well, that's reconnecting. Question coming in about how does ADOA see the role of the state compared to other similar efforts led by utility companies as it pertains to these electrification plans?
So I can tell you that all of the major power suppliers within the state, each one of them have a plan in place for electrification. Some of them, have a plan that goes 20 to 30 years out and have very specific plans in place as to what they're going to do. I know that all three of the major providers are offering rebates for folks that are purchasing EVs. They also have rebates in regards to trying to assist companies in putting in EV charging stations. So there's some very robust plans in place from the power companies. From the state perspective, and specifically ADOA and my role, what we have been able to do is put in a number of publicly available charging stations at various locations. Let's see if we can, sorry, I'm trying to reconnect here. Bear with me, Chris. Chris, are you still there? Chris?
You're muted, Chris.
Okay, but you can still hear me?
Oh, no, hopefully you can hear me. There we go.
Yes. Okay.
Okay,
Sorry,
there we go. I'm trying to reestablish my connection here, so I apologize for that.
No, you were talking about the charging stations, and I wanted to ask the question that just came in about a map. Is there a map available that shows where existing and future planned charging stations are coming in?
Yes, there's a number of locations that you can go to on the internet. If you were to go to ChargePoint, for example, you could just do a quick Google search and ChargePoint, and it would, you can look at the entire state, you can look at the entire country, you can punch in by zip code. So EV drivers, you can punch in on your vehicle, and it will do a search for nearby charging stations as well. So there's a number of ways that you can get to that information.
Okay. And are you, in your role, Tom, are you consulting a lot with New Mexico, for example, and Nevada as we're kind of building out this network across the Southwest? Is there a pretty active level of dialogue?
So there is in regards to Rev West. So Rev West is putting us all together on regular meetings, and we're having conversations there. I cannot tell you that there are one-off meetings that are taking place. I know that there's a program taking place between us and Utah right now. So you talk about Rev West, and I talked about kind of the bigger platform, but there's another program called Core West, and that is to try and put in DC fast charging stations in smaller towns and in rural areas as well.
Fantastic.
Chris, hopefully we will have our video back here.
No problem. The fun part of our lives these days with technology. Another question I wanted to throw out there is many states have been utilizing funds from the VW settlement for different projects related to clean energy. Can you maybe shed some light on how the Southwest is looking at utilizing some of those funds for different EV projects, whether it be in Arizona or other parts of the Southwest?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. In speaking with a number of our surrounding states, I know that they have used the VW settlement funding for a number of pieces. And some of those pieces were to replace school buses, for example. Some of them were to replace school buses and other type of on-highway large equipment that met specific requirements. And then the school district and or the town could designate the type of equipment that they wanted to replace it with, as long as it met the criteria. There are other states that allowed some of the VW settlement funding to be used for electrification and to put in EV charging stations as well. So there was a whole host of different ways. I can tell you that Arizona, this decision was made before I came into play, and it was made from the governor's office that the VW settlement funding would be used specifically for school bus replacement and large on-highway equipment for different entities.
Very good.
Chris, is my video back? Are you able to see my video?
Unfortunately, not yet. We can see you, but we can't quite see the presentation. It looks like it's still trying to reactivate.
And
while we're waiting for that to come online, if just as a reminder, if you have questions for Tom, by all means, just pop them in the chat window, and we'll happily include those in the conversation. The other thing I was going to ask was related to. Oh, there we go. You're back.
All right.
We have you. I'll hold on that next question and let you continue on with your presentation.
And we will try this one more time here. I apologize for the technical issues.
Meanwhile, Tom, we do have a fun question that just came in is, does your Edsel run, and do you have any plans to electrify it?
I love the question, and I can tell you it's a 1958 Edsel. It has 35,000 original miles. I and my father are the second owner of this vehicle. The last time it ran was a number of years ago. I've invested a bunch of money to upgrade some parts for it, and I have also looked into electrifying this, and it's an interesting note that you can purchase, the battery's separate, the electric motor's separate, and you can upgrade old vehicles, old internal combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles. I just need a larger funding source and able to do that, and I would happily allow folks to use that for their presentations and their parades as a talking point. So if there's anybody out there that would like to jump on board with that, I'm happy to have the conversation.
You might be relaunching the Edsel brand as we speak here, which is fantastic.
We could be, and hopefully it's successful.
That's awesome. All right, I think we're back to where we were a moment ago with the.
All right, let's try this one more time, and if it knocks us out, we're just going to skip here. So okay. So where we were at was we punched in the different types of vehicles, and this makes some assumptions on annual fuel cost based on the input that we put in. So you can see here that with this gasoline vehicle, your fuel cost would be $889 per year, and on the electric vehicle it would be $426. So just about half the cost for an electric vehicle. And as you run that out, an average vehicle, folks keep an average vehicle for 7 to 10 years. You can run those numbers along with the maintenance piece and see where your savings really come. Another piece that's interesting here is your emissions. So if you compare your pounds of CO2 on an electric vehicle versus pounds of CO2 for a gasoline type vehicle, you can see the savings there as well.
And Tom, what are you seeing is the average lifespan for the batteries for electric vehicles? So if typical ownership is 7 to 10 years, how are the batteries mapping in terms of lifespan?
That's a fantastic question, because as you looked at some of the early adopters and, you look at the battery technology, they seem to be leapfrogging kind of that technology on an annual basis. So it just seems to get better and better and better. So if you look back 7 years ago on these batteries, and there was some battery degradation that manufacturers were saying were allowable. So you could be at 50% life cycle after 5 years. Many of the OEMs now are putting a 10-year warranty on the batteries themselves because they know that that's a concern of folks. And they know that if they want to get better and better at this, they have to keep making incremental improvements. So it's a very valid question. And it's kind of like fuel economy. When you looked at some of the older vehicles, nobody cared about fuel economy in the, necessarily in the 50s. They just wanted more power and more room and go. And, you compare those vehicles to today's gas-powered vehicles, and just the progression of it.
And this, on a related note, this might be in your truth or myth type piece, but is there any truth to, even if you have to replace the battery on your electric vehicle, you're still less total cost of ownership than a standard car, or do you know?
The way that I would compare that is that if you had to replace a battery, and if you had to replace an engine. So if you get to that point of vehicle ownership and you're kind of turning that vehicle over for a second life cycle, if you will, I think most people would, at that point they're trading that vehicle in or looking for other options that they could do with the vehicle. So I think you have to take that consideration into place. So, if you were to go into a dealership and replace your battery, and I think it would be very comparable to having to replace an engine at a dealership. So if it's costing you $10,000 to replace that engine, and you're comparing that to a battery, it's probably apples to apples.
Got it. We have another question that just popped in. Came in when we were transitioning back to your presentation, but so New Mexico, Colorado are taking actions to be zero emission vehicle states. Is there a plan in place for Arizona to follow in a similar path that you can speak to?
Is that from a state perspective and a state mandate, Chris?
I believe so. Yes.
For their state-owned vehicles and fleet, or out to the public? And I just want to look for some clarification on the question.
Yeah, good question. I think state-owned and potentially private-owned vehicles in those other states.
So I can tell you from the Department of Administration side, we have a whopping total of 2 electric vehicles that we have put into our fleet, and that's taken place since January 1 of this year that we've obtained those vehicles. The way that we have obtained those vehicles is through a grant from the Department of Energy, and it's our SEP grant. So it's the State Energy Program grant, and that's what funds all of the programs that I work with. Within that, we have a piece for electrification and reducing fossil fuels. So we are doing some testing with those vehicles to see where that lands with folks and see how the state adopts to that. Ultimately, to answer your question today, there is not an executive mandate in place that we are going to have X number of vehicles by a specific date.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So I think we're at one of our interactive polling questions.
Correct. We've seen 4 folks have been able to answer the question. So if you're struggling, if you just hold your camera up to the QR code, it should pull up a prompt to take you out to the poll. And then I'm able to see the answers on my side. Looks like we have 5 folks that have been able to respond so far. We're at 6 now. 7.
Nothing like real-time polling.
8. No, this is great. This is great. So this is the first time that I've used this polling. I learned about it about 2 hours ago, so I'm happy to respond that the only issue that we've had with technology today was the internet and not this polling piece. We have 10 at this point that have responded. Maybe we'll give it another minute or so, Chris.
Sure, not a problem.
I'd be happy to answer any other questions that are coming in as we're waiting for the result.
Yeah, another question is, can you talk about the relationship you have in your role with the U.S. Department of Energy? You mentioned some of the grant elements that you're responsible for, but what's the relationship on the federal and the state side, and how that dialogue is happening and what it's manifesting in terms of new advancements for electrification and transportation?
Sure. No, that's a great question. And so I work closely with the Department of Energy, and we have regular calls with them. We receive grant funding. It's a 3-year grant funding cycle. It's the State Energy Program. The first 2 years of this funding can be rolled into the 3rd year, and we are currently in our 3rd year of funding. Within that grant and our application process, there are specific pieces that we put in place that we are going to use that funding for. One of those areas is electrification and EV. So it's our responsibility, once we receive this funding, to go out and put all these things in place. So with that funding thus far, we've purchased 1.25 electric vehicles. So we funded a portion of the 2nd electric vehicle through the SEP funding. We have a number of charging stations in place that are workplace charging stations that are also available to the public. We are looking at using some of those funding for national parks within the state as well as state parks. So we have a great relationship with the Department of Energy, and it's great to have that funding available to us to further these efforts.
And does any of that funding apply toward bringing electrified transportation to underserved communities, as an example?
It can. So, for example, if we had, so if there was state subsidized housing, for example, and we identified that that would be a great location to put in an EV charging station, it kind of ties back into our apartment dwelling and putting charging stations into those locations. It could be used for that as well. We can also use that funding for small outlying towns and cities if we wanted to put them in there as well. We are currently having conversations with many of the outlying towns to try and assist them with putting in EV charging stations. So I think Chris, we have a bunch of answers here. So I'd like to give you the results of how many of you currently own an EV. So we have 12 respondents. Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot here. And we have 13 now. So Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot here and have you take a guess at the percentage of folks that currently own an EV.
You said 12, I'm going to say 25%.
You apparently have very good insight, and you're kind of tuned in. So the result on this question is 23%. So we have 23% of the folks that have responded currently own an EV, and I think that's a fantastic number. I'm curious a little bit if it's because a lot of the folks that are on the call today are involved in electrification in one way, shape, or form, and are much more familiar with the benefits of EVs. But nonetheless, I think it's a great result that we have here. With that being said, I'd like to go to another polling question here, and this will be for the 77% that do not currently own an EV. So there's another polling question here.
And as a reminder, if you didn't hear it on the last question, if you hold your camera on your phone up to the QR code, it should prompt you to then connect to be able to answer this question. While that polling on this has popped up, another question has come in. Tom, what in your opinion is the role of the EPA Smart Way program in electrification efforts? If you have insights.
Chris, I don't at this point in time, so I apologize that I'm going to have to defer on that question.
Okay, no problem. We'll come back. And one of the things I was going to also just go back to, something you said earlier, Tom, was if you had to look at, biggest accomplishments so far in the Southwest as it pertains to electrification and transportation, what would you say those are? What are those biggest accomplishments?
I think looking from a leadership stance, you have to start these somewhere, right? So I know that there are many grassroots things that are taking place, different communities that are trying to put in EVs, different clubs that are promoting EVs. So I think there are many grassroots things that are taking place, but probably the single largest piece that impacts this is from a leadership stance, and it has to do with Rev West, that these 8 states and 8 governors have signed on and have supported in varying degrees to be able to put this corridor together. So I think from a leadership stance, I think it's great to see that the governors have done this. They've put it in place. There's collaboration between all of these states to kind of put in a united path for folks to be able to drive. compare notes, compare benefits, be able to have different types of purchasing programs for charging stations, and potentially put in different types of rebates and programs for individuals that are purchasing the vehicles. So I think that's probably the single largest piece that's been put into place. From there, I would talk about the kind of the utility companies and what the utility companies are doing to support electrification. We briefly touched on it previously in regards to rebates from them, workplace charging, offsetting the cost of putting in charging stations at different types of facilities. So I think that's a huge piece as well. And then the OEMs, coming on board and different, providing different types of discounts and that type of thing. So there's a few things there, Chris.
Very good. All right, so now the reveal on the biggest hurdles.
Let's see. So we've got a few different answers here, and it'll tie into my next question as well. And I think as you were answering these, there was a couple of questions that may have popped up. So what are your biggest hurdles that you feel need to be overcome for you to purchase an EV? There are still some results that are coming in, but the biggest one right now is range anxiety. And there's still some answers popping in. So now price is coming in, but range anxiety is popping up again, and the education program as well. So I think this gives us a pretty good sampling. And I'll talk a little bit about range anxiety and what that really means for folks. And range anxiety is, I want to travel from point A to point B, and I don't want to have to worry about running out of power in my vehicle. And where do I charge? What's the distance that this type of vehicle can go? Some of the early vehicles, 7 years ago, their range on some of these vehicles were less than 100 miles. We're seeing today well over 300 miles for different types of batteries that you can go on these long trips with, and then be able to charge. So range anxiety seems to be kind of leading here. Price, as there are more and more electric vehicles out there, we see that the price is coming down. I think initially it was, how do I want to say this? I think electric vehicles initially were thought to be a rich person's vehicle, if you will. And I think that the OEMs have recognized that if they want adoption, they have to make it affordable for the masses. And I think that we've seen the price points come down. There are many manufacturers that say that their entire line is going to be available in an electric form in one way or another. And then we also have education program in here as well.
On that note, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, go ahead. Nope, go ahead.
I'm just going to ask, is it the range anxiety and the question on or the comment on education, what's being done to educate people about the development of charging stations so that it can impact their perceptions or feelings about range anxiety? Knowing that
sure,
if you get in the vehicle and you drive 200, 300 miles, that you confidently are going to be able to find that charging station when you need it. What can you talk about that? What the education process is in answering or addressing that concern?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to, Chris. I think it starts with a few different folks. I think the OEMs. So you have to gain interest in one way, shape, or form. So I think that the OEMs are doing different types of marketing towards the consumer to make them aware of what types of vehicles there are, what the ranges are. So I think it starts with them. There is different types of education for fleets. There's different types of educations for businesses that are out there. I think some of the power companies are going and having these conversations. we have a goal council, and there are many folks on there. And one of the things we talk about is exactly that. If you want more adoption of these, how do you educate folks? And whether it be through seminars, I'm working with a nonprofit group down in Tucson, and they are doing educational seminars for a group of folks in Tucson and trying to teach them how to electrify their fleet. And that is being done through part of our SEP funding. So tying that specifically back to the funding that's available to us and how that's being pushed out down in Tucson.
Very good. I know we are coming up toward the top of the hour, maybe time for a question or two left. Did you want to put in one more polling question, Tom, or take some questions from the audience? Okay.
And they've already answered this question, and this question was, how likely are you to purchase an EV in the next 5 years on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being unlikely and 5 being very likely? The leading answer here by a huge amount is 5, and there are 6 folks now that are saying that in the next 5 years, so 6 out of 11, more than 50%, are saying that in the next 5 years, they would be willing to purchase an electric vehicle. So I think that's
a good trend line. Yeah, that actually leads to kind of one of my last questions as well, is if it kind of may help me complete this sentence, Tom. If in 15 to 20 years, the Southwest transportation system regarding electrified transportation is going to look like what? What might that look like in your view?
In my opinion, I think it's going to be multimodal. And what I see is I foresee a large number of electric vehicles as the adoption rate, kind of increases. We talked a little bit about just the sampling of our group of how many of you currently own an EV. We're at 23% today. We have well over 50% stating that in the next 5 years. So it kind of validates what my opinion is through some actual data. So I foresee, a number of things taking place. I think autonomous vehicles are going to continue to increase, and I think those dovetail with electric vehicles hand in hand. I think the adoption of electric vehicles are going to increase. I think that we are going to see the number of charging stations that are out there just multiplied year after year. And I think folks are going to look for, the benefits of lower emissions, the lower cost. I think the education piece will continue to take place. I think Rev West is going to help with that as well. So I think it's going to be a dovetail of a number of things. So autonomous vehicles, electric shuttles, more adoption, not only for electric personal vehicles, but as I talk to folks in the industrial sector, we're seeing electric school buses, we're seeing electric sweepers, we're seeing more and more electric industrial equipment that folks are kind of diving into. So I think it's just going to be the new norm in 20 years that there are a lot of electric vehicles out on the road, and folks don't really think twice about seeing them out there. So that's my personal opinion based on our polling today and many other conversations that I've had in the past.
And do you have any advice for all of us who work in transportation daily of how we can help you and further advance the electrification agenda?
I think we need to electrify. I think we need to electrify the edsel. I think we need to use the edsel as an education tool to show folks that the evolution of the edsel into today's electrified vehicle. So that's just a little bit of my personality there. But I think education is a really big piece, and talking about electric vehicles, and that it's not just a fad or a niche that's just going to go away in a few years, because I truly don't think that that's the case. I think just talking about it, adopting these vehicles, if you're hesitant to, maybe go do a test drive in one. It doesn't mean that you're purchasing one, but just to familiarize yourself and educate yourself on what electrification really is and what those vehicles could look like and what they feel like to drive.
And Tom, if you can get that Edsel converted, we'd love to have you back to see what that looks like.
Thank you.
That'd be awesome. I want to thank you, Tom, for taking the time to join us this morning. This has been great in going through the questions. I know we had a little bit of a technical glitch there, but I think this was a fun conversation. So thank you so much for being part of our event. I do want to remind everyone who's on the line that we'll be having our next webinar on October 22nd. And we'll have Paul Comfort, who is a transportation industry legend of sorts and also a book author who has written a book on the future of transportation. He's done both an adult version and a children's book. And so Paul's going to be joining us on October 22nd at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And would love to have everybody join in that discussion. And we'll have more updates on future webinars coming up in October, November, and December to follow. But for now, thank you, everybody. And this session today will be has been recorded and will be posted on the ACT Valley of the Sun and ACT National website for follow-up viewing. So
hey,
thank
Chris,
you all.
Chris, before you go, this is Ruth. I don't think that's the right date.
I'm sorry.
That's not the right date.
September 24th, right?
Oh, excuse me. I said October. I'm sorry. September.
You're getting excited.
I jumped a month ahead. Thank you, Ruth. Forgive me.
24th, not the 27th.
September, yes, September 24th. I apologize. I had a different calendar in front of me. So September 24th at 10 a.m., Paul Comfort talking about the future of transportation. And that's it for today. So thank you all. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
Thanks, Tom. Bye-bye.